Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Today, I'm Dennis Ward. On today's In Focus, it's been just over a year since the camps at Standing Rock were shut down, and we want to see what's happening now. We also want you to join in our conversation. Our phone lines are open. Call us toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus. Use the hashtag #NoDapple. Before I introduce you to our guests, there's been speculation of many new Standing Rocks popping up around the globe. Recently returned to Standing Rock in a new camp on the Cheyenne River Sioux territory, and we spoke with some of the big players in the movement who say there will never be another so-called Standing Rock, but the movement is alive and well. Many will never forget the images from February 23rd, 2017. Especially those running from law enforcement across the Cannonball River as the No Dapple camps were cleared out. That was nearly 9 months ago. Today, only a small memorial sits along the former entrance to the Oceti camp.
It's sour. It hurts every time. Every single time I drive by there, up and back. My daughter, my family, the same way. You know what I mean? When she's with me, she expresses feelings whenever we drive by there. And I know that it's like that for the tens of thousands of people who came here in person.
Chase Iron Eyes is a lawyer and member of Standing Rock Tribe, and he's facing legal troubles of his own as a result of the months-long protest against the pipeline. The recently elected chairman of Standing Rock says there needs to be some healing at home.
Let everybody know we're continuing our fight in court. We're out in the communities. We're back going to the communities and trying to heal ourselves, asking the communities what's their need, how can we help them fix themselves in a positive manner, whether it be drugs, whether it be housing, health care. We fought the fight, but again, in the long run, we kind of neglected our own.
Where tens of thousands of people once stayed is now mostly an empty field with some cattle. The gates to the Oceti camp are locked off to the public, but the movement that started here continues.
Standing Rock was a seed. Standing Rock was just this little thing that went into the ground, and now it's growing everywhere and spreading everywhere. Now, for all the Indigenous people across the world, we're talking to each other. We are no longer standing alone. We will help everyone who is standing up now.
One of those seeds spread immediately to Cheyenne River Sioux tribe territory in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. Joy Braun was one of the first 4 people in Standing Rock and is continuing the stand against Dakota Access and gearing up for Keystone XL. TransCanada announced an oil leak in South Dakota on Thursday. Nebraska is expected to give approval to the pipeline on Monday.
TransCanada has said that they're not expecting to start pre-construction until the spring. And that gives us the winter to get ready.
Many of those who played pivotal roles in Standing Rock say there will never be another. But they say those seeds have spread to Canada in the fight against Trans Mountain Pipeline, in Minnesota and Wisconsin, where a large camp is fighting against Line 3.
Often I get asked, what's the next move? Where is this going to go? But for me, it's been a continuum. It hasn't never stopped. We're all continuing to fight. Now camp is the globe.
Joining us now from Tucson, Arizona via Skype is award-winning journalist Jenni Monet. Jenni covered the No Dapple movement and spent months on the ground in Standing Rock. Jenni was also arrested while doing her job covering a police raid on February 1st, 2017. Also arrested that day and joining us momentarily via phone is Chase Iron Eyes, a lawyer, member from Standing Rock and a former United States Congressional candidate. And in studio, Indigenous activist, environmentalist, and campaigner with 350.org, Clayton Thomas Muller, who spent a number of occasions in Standing Rock as well. Thank you all for being with us here today. Jenni, as we saw, the camps were shut down a little over a year ago now, February 23rd. You and I were both there. I'd like to start with a little reflection back on what your experiences were like covering the whole event over the 9 months.
Yeah, well, just directly discussing that day, I deliberately stayed in my hotel room on February 23rd to risk avoiding a second arrest. I had been arrested February 1st, and then the day before, the militarized police scaled fences and brought their fleet of armed vehicles and held some at gunpoint to clear those camps. I had been chased by police the day before on Highway 1806. That was the day that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had originally slated to clear the camps, and several people had come to observe, including legal observers with Amnesty International and other human rights groups. You obviously had the last resistors who had been living at the camp for many months, and then journalists, independent and otherwise, live bloggers, for instance, were, I think, some of the heroes of that time because they risked their independence. They went out there into the fields and were able to be the eyes and ears for a lot of people that day as those camps got cleared.
Clayton, for yourself, over the occasions you went down and being back here and watching it, what was it like as a movement from when it first started to the end date?
I think that Standing Rock changed the world, and we, as members of our nations, as members of the global movement for Indigenous rights and climate justice, owe a debt to everybody who put their bodies on the line. In the same way that we owe a debt to those that participated in Oka and Gustafson Lake, in Wounded Knee, in the Longest Walk, I think Chief Orville Lookinghorse, the carrier of the sacred white buffalo calf pipe, said it best in a recent Guardian article that Standing Rock is everywhere now. And, it was through the moral crisis that these brave water protectors facilitated against the state of North Dakota, the U.S. government and Energy Transfer's partners, that sparked a fire, especially in our young people. And we see these fights escalating, whether it's in British Columbia against the Trans Mountain Pipeline led by Tsleil-Waututh and other coastal Salish peoples, or in Louisiana with the other fight against ETP with the Bayou Bridge pipeline that they're trying to build down there on the Gulf Coast. Indigenous peoples are communicating, we're sharing resources, we are escalating against this neo-colonial form of colonization in our homelands brought to us by energy corporations working in collusion with governments.
Chase, I understand you're on the phone with us now. As someone who lives in the area, what was it like for you back when the camps first opened, right through till now?
It's been a whirlwind, and thank you for having me on. I was there in the initial meetings when, as a tribal nation, as a community, we were trying to figure out how we were really going to fight, a multi-billion-dollar transnational energy, corporations, various numbers of corporations, but that force that's represented by the extractive and financial industries of a global economy. We really, it was like David versus Goliath, and that's what it still is. Even though, the pipeline is in our homeland, it stands as a continuing trespass and an act of international aggression by these corporations and by the United States. And right now, the fight is still on in the courtroom, and we're also about to launch a sovereignty campaign, a capital campaign, because we are not prepared for an oil spill right now. If the pipeline would break today, we would have about 4 days or 5 days of stored water. We could shut off our valves, but after that point, we're buying water. And we could talk about the privatization of water or the continuing criminalization of dissent in Canada and the United States. as part of the legacies of Standing Rock. But I wanted to add that much for now, and thank you for having me on again.
Chase, appreciate you being able to join us, especially on such short notice. Jenni, when you think back on that summer, August, July of 2016, when so many people were arriving every day, watching those canoes come in, this massive gathering, what do you think that meant not only for those who came together, but for Indigenous peoples around the globe who couldn't be there, but were seeing the images coming out of there?
Sure. I think the biggest takeaway for me when I look in the rear view is that there was a real need for people to be there. It wasn't just that people gathered by happenstance. We saw not only the call just come from Standing Rock itself to stand in solidarity to protect the water, but I think once people got on the ground there, we realized that it was about so much more than stopping a pipeline, right? I mean, it was tapping into something that goes generations deep, of a story upon a story that has played itself out around, and about the taking of lands, and about promises broken, trauma that required healing. And I don't think that ever was really fully crystallized for me on the ground until that day on September 9th, when we saw in 2016, when we saw the Obama administration overrule the court and a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers saying, you know what, we really need to pause here and take a look and see what's happening. And I think that to have that kind of understanding that this was, to be sure, a pipeline battle and governments colluding with a multinational energy company, this was also about Native peoples finally being heard and realizing that their voices, when used with integrity, could be quite powerful.
That was quite a roller coaster day, the 9th. They approved the pipeline, and by the time we got into Bismarck for some follow-up, it was already had been shut down again by the Obama administration. For yourself, Clayton, we met people down there from all across, from Treaty 1 in Manitoba, all across this country. What was it like for you to see in those initial days this massive gathering from people from all over the globe, really?
Well, I think that, for me, I was inspired. Standing Rock was not a surprise to me. It didn't come out of left field. It was a well-calculated social movement strategy built off of other intersectional social movement strategies. There had been years of preparation by Indigenous peoples in South Dakota, in Nebraska, preparing for an approval of the Keystone XL pipeline and a real ditch fight against the Obama administration. There were thousands of young people trained on how to do nonviolent civil disobedience. There was all kinds of social movement infrastructure built up in the region. And so with the rejection of the Keystone XL pipeline by the Obama administration, of course it's been reanimated by Donald Trump, like any good social movement strategy, that infrastructure switched over and became the infrastructure for DAPL. And, through the leadership of Indigenous peoples in Standing Rock, especially the women and the young people, we've seen it grow into a camp of tens of thousands with millions of people tuning in through Indigenous people's social media infrastructure like Indigenous Media Rising, a lot of the drone operators. There was a lot of excellent work done, including by non-native outlets as well, like Unicorn Riot, that brought the world in to see what was happening there on the shores of the Missouri River. And so for me, it mobilized me and friends that I'm affiliated with here in the city of Winnipeg and Treaty 1 territory to organize our city, to send down supply runs to Standing Rock over the duration of the encampments, to organize fundraising efforts, to send down to, the groups that were leading the different spiritual encampments down there on the banks of the Missouri River during the conflict.
Chase, as yourself, you and I have talked about how weird it is now to see where the camp used to be, but what was it like for you to, as somebody who's from that territory, to see go from an empty field to, 10, 13,000 people at one point?
Is that a question for me? This is
Yes.
Chase?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sorry, I just cut out now. Yeah, and I just want to say hi to Clayton and Jenni as well. I can tell now. I remembered who was on the panel. But I'll tell you that what happened at Standing Rock represents an international spiritual monument to this day. And to drive by there every every single day. You know, we go to Bismarck, North Dakota, every so often as part of it's a border town, and you know, we go from the res to the border town. I've been doing that my whole life, and hopefully we can change that. But to see it spring up and to unite tens of thousands of people, scores of thousands of people came there in person and lent of themselves. Millions of people online, perhaps billions around the world, were aware, had participated, either, you know, conceptively in thought, in prayer, in their energy, or donating, or going in person, or just sharing it, organizing actions in their territory. And I think, you know, that's the larger struggle that Standing Rock represents. Standing Rock was and continues to be indigenous-led. But the struggle, you know, for liberation of Mother Earth, or whether you're talking political, legal, or economic liberation, is a struggle that we're born into. And on one side of that line is capital, fear, separation, you know, division and ignorance. And those of us on the front line out there at Standing Rock, or wherever your fight may be, stepped up to that boundary line. And we were met with, you know, the barrels of guns, a purported kind of a proprietorship of what law and order is. And Standing Rock is part of that struggle that seeks to reshape what has been sold to us as civilization. But anyway, that's what this represented for me, or for somebody that's from Standing Rock, somebody who's descended from those that signed the treaty of 1868 between the Great Sioux Nation, you know, the Cheyenne, Northern Cheyenne, and the Arapaho and the United States. And we need to continue to recognize, you know, our original sovereignty, our intrinsic authority to determine our destiny in our homelands, but also to speak of these treaties, because, you know, the Indian Act or the body of federal Indian law in the United States is very inherently oppressive. Its very nature is oppressive, and we need to continue to address that as Indigenous people, but also as members of human family.
I understand we have a caller on the line right now joining us from New York. Bill, if you can hear me, go ahead.
Okay. First, huge thanks to everybody that organized out there at Standing Rock. I made 2 trips from upstate New York to go out there last year. I don't know what it was, 1,500 miles or whatever. But one thing I want to point out is that as despicable a person and president as Donald Trump is, the Dakota Access Pipeline is really much more Obama's pipeline than it is Trump's, and that Obama took some steps there at the end when things got really organized and heated to kind of save face, but that pipeline is sort of a continuation of Obama's policies. And he also left after 8 years, left Leonard Peltier still in prison. And so I'm not sure what we do from here, but we got our work cut out for us, and we just don't need any more candidates like that are all the above, or like Hillary Clinton on these energy matters. Thank you.
Bill, if you're still there, do you mind, Bill, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Do you mind if I ask you, you know, you said you made a couple of trips. That's a long drive. What took you out to Standing Rock?
Well, it was clear that was ground zero of the climate movement, and something real special was happening there, and I wanted to witness it. Prior to that, I had gone out to North Dakota into the Bakken region because a company there that has had a lot of pipeline spills, Crestwood, has wanted to store gas at Seneca Lake here in New York. And so I wanted to do some research out there on Crestwood's history so I could bring it back here to New York to try to stop their plans to store natural gas in salt caverns under Seneca Lake.
Bill, appreciate you taking the time to call in today.
Thank you.
And we've got to step aside ourselves here for just a quick break, but then we'll be right back to continue on the conversation on the legacy of the movement in Standing Rock 1 year after the camps were closed. Welcome back to In Focus. We're going to go to some social media now to hear what some of you have been saying about today's topic. One of the questions we asked this past week was 1 year after the No DAPL camps were cleared out, what's the legacy of Standing Rock? And Karen says, Standing Rock, never mind the distraction, focus on your people. If the spotlight is going to be on you, what changes will Standing Rock make on such an experience? And Karen continues with, now is the time for important questions and actions made for betterment of the people and nations. That is the spirit of Standing Rock. And to Tori now, who also commented on Facebook, the FBI and local sheriff and their government sent in their informants during those peaceful protests to stir up trouble. Colonizers will do anything to save their town water supply and grave sites. And Tori continues on here, if I can just get to it, there we go. But when Indigenous people's person stands up to protect their rights, they bring in military-style security, spraying citizens with tear gas, rubber bullets to protect big oil interests. And to Diane here, also on Facebook, said Standing Rock was monumental in so many ways. Today, Standing Rock is everywhere, and it's only gaining momentum. Diane continues, great power was emitted, and perhaps there was those that were unworthy of that power, but has truly manifested in so much bigger than some petty swindling. That's just a few of the comments we had today. If you'd like to add your opinion to our topic of conversation, here's how. In our conversation now, send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Like our APTN InFocus Facebook page, follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, or call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. And welcome back. We are going to shift some attention now to money, and that's what this pipeline was about. But the No DAPL movement was also big money for some of the groups on the ground, and most definitely for the private contractors who were brought in. Here's former Standing Rock Tribal Chair Dave Archambault and current Tribal Chair Mike Faith speaking about the money that was raised.
I know that there was probably about, for the entire movement, there was probably about 40 million that was raised in total. But I can't tell you how or what the other 29 million was used for, because it didn't come through the tribe. You'd have to ask the individual organizations that received donations through GoFundMe or through their nonprofit.
Standing Rock's name was used. I truly believe it was probably used in the wrong way. Some of it actually was spent in a good way here with some of the local groups that were here. But again, some of the fundraising that took place wasn't even close to these areas. Over 5,000 accounts, and of course out of that, Standing Rock was just one. So,
Jenny, in an earlier interview with former Chair Archambault and some others on council, they felt that money and the amount of money that started coming in really ruined the movement. What are your thoughts and what you saw in terms of the money that was coming in and how it was being used?
Well, look, I don't think it can be ignored that what we're talking about is a community that, to begin with, was deeply rooted in cyclical poverty. These issues about financial shortcomings on an annual basis, on how to support elder programs, youth programs, schools, right? I mean, and all the societal symptoms that socioeconomic shortcomings can bring, that was already there before you brought the largest Indigenous gathering that we've come to know in modern times. And I think that when you bring in the equation of mass donations that were happening, that we saw on GoFundMe, Facebook, and on any number of sites and even checks that were mailed in, I think that that really changed the dynamic on the ground, and that's the sentiment I heard over and over again, not only from water protectors, but from tribal leaders that we're hearing from now.
Jace, there was a pretty well-known story in the local paper called Legitimizing Plunder at Standing Rock, and I've spoken to a few about this, that You know, millions and millions were donated and collected in the name of Standing Rock, and yet the reality of life on the reservation there is one of continuing poverty.
Yeah, that's kind of, I guess it's unfortunate that it happened like that, you know. I think Standing Rock raised 25% of whatever that whole movement was worth in terms of, you know, to financialize it, I guess. But also, we need to remember that Tiger Swan, you know, was the premier corporate instigator of violence, of fear, of creating an enemy. And they also made, you know, not just them alone, but the National Guard, the state law enforcement agencies, up to $38 million, $40 million of North Dakota's taxpayer money as well. And I don't, you know, we can't fight over money now. I think it's clear to see that whoever instigated what functioned as an economic sanction, but the most highly militarized roadblock that part of the country has ever seen, resulted in choking off our only profit, our only disposable income. It was kind of like a modern day sign or starve when they used to cut the rations off if we didn't do their agenda's bidding, or we didn't go along with assimilation. And so that's really what happened. I believe it was an orchestrated effort. We're dealing with the highest levels of that those industrial forces, and so they're using all the tools at their disposal as well, including advanced intelligence gathering capabilities, monitoring, and just a professional, real-life wartime experience with doing this, destabilizing movements that oppose their agenda.
Clayton, you're somebody you know, who helped raise funds for this movement. Did you see concern? Do you have concerns or see anything that was concerning to you in the raising of these millions of dollars?
You know, I think that this kind of focus, you know, this divisive focus on the money issue has definitely been fueled by dark forces. You know, a breaking story this week was the Russian interference in Standing Rock. You know, there was oil money, state money, dark money coming from Russia. You know, this was on the eve of Donald Trump's election to become the 45th president of the United States. And The Guardian reported that, you know, there was a huge social media apparatus that focused on Standing Rock, that promoted, you know, violent direct action, that sent out confusing social media, that alarmed, you know, members of the Legislative Assembly of the state of North Dakota and the security apparatus. You know, these are people with serious white supremacy, racism issues that were duped by, you know, Russian bots, Russian, you know, kind of spy strategy, working in collusion with some of the darkest corporations, as Chase mentioned, Tiger Swan, who, you know, took the playbook out of the COINTELPRO strategy of the 70s of the FBI, you know, and they were excellent at sowing division, sowing paranoia amongst the different indigenous camps in Standing Rock, which, you know, continues to exist up to date. I think the focus is so important now more than ever to continue to look at, you know, this issue of the incursion of multinational corporations into our homelands, the important responsibility that we have as water protectors, and that we continue to organize in a way that is unified. And we are, you know, members of the DAPL fight, of the Keystone XL fight, are coming to the March 10th mobilization in Vancouver in the Tsleil-Waututh territory against Trans Mountain Pipeline by a foreign company, the Kinder Morgan Energy Transportation Company out of Houston, Texas. There is collaboration in Alberta against the Tech Frontier mine, the largest tar sands mine expansion to date, which at some point the approval will fall on our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's desk in early 2019, late 2018, and Indigenous peoples, you know, all the way from Louisiana's Bio Bridge pipeline fight, Standing Rock, the Keystone XL, British Columbia's fight against the Trans Mountain will all be coming to the tar sands this summer to train up and, you know, fight against that project. So, you know, again, I remind us about the guidance of Chief Orville Lookinghorse, the carrier of the White Buffalo Sacred Calf Pipe, and when he says that Standing Rock is everywhere, it really is.
Jenni, we're talking about Tiger Swan and the private contractors that work there, and it seems like every couple of weeks more blockbuster insider reports are coming out of what was taking place down there inside of these operations. Were you surprised to see some of this stuff coming out? I mean, there were always some paranoia even amongst ourselves that people were listening to us or whatever, but were you surprised to see just how much, these private contractors were involved in what was taking place down there?
I was not surprised at all, and I'm grateful that Chase has brought up the fact that Tiger Swan was in direct collusion with the North Dakota government, who is still in debt and received, I think, upwards to the amount of I'm missing the amount of money that was returned to them by the United States government, the state of North Dakota. But the United States is reimbursing the state of North Dakota for its law enforcement coalition across states, including the use of the National Guard and the use of paramilitary organization Tiger Swan, who has worked single-handedly to work against green organizations like Greenpeace in paid-for protesting lawsuits. That's another layer to this that we're not looking at. And just by memory, I'm reminded in this discussion about money that in the aftermath, the tax commissioner of Morton County, or at least in the state of North Dakota, had mentioned that there would be scrutiny paid to some of these protest organizations, so-called like Greenpeace, 350.org, in which they would be going after them for audit to zero in on this argument that people were there as a salaried protester, that they were there to incite this kind of uprising there on the North Dakota prairie. And that's a real systematic kind of complaint that you're starting to hear from the right, right? This kind of rhetoric that protest bills are now mandated, for instance, in 30 states, 56 anti-protest bills. That's in direct response to movements like Standing Rock. In the immediate aftermath of Standing Rock, for instance, we saw that at the South Dakota State Legislature. And in many ways, it's happening in silence. There's not a lot of public information around it, and there's certainly not a lot of opportunity for the public to respond and say, this is not okay.
Also worth pointing out, Energy Transfer Partners themselves, the company building the pipeline, wired the North Dakota government $15 million to help pay for some of the costs to the...
That's what it was, Dennis. It was the $15 million.
And as you mentioned, I wanted to talk a little bit about these bills, and hopefully we can a little later because I'm going to throw to a call. But the one that, while the movement was still going on, to if you happen to run over a protester, that was going to be the protester's fault, that the driver who might have done that wouldn't be at fault for that. Anyways, we will get back to that, I hope, but I'm going to throw to another call, and that's from Joe Sini. Joe, you were also arrested coming back from Standing Rock, but go ahead and share your thoughts with us.
I just want to say bonjour to everyone out there, and just had a flashback watching the coverage that you're having right now, and I just wanted to add a few comments, and I guess the money issue is always going to be in the way of any kind of land protection. There's always going to be that division that's brought in to disrupt the people. I guess for my comment is when it really comes down to standing up and protecting lands and waters, we always have to stay focused, and that's for those yet to come and the unborn. I think of when it comes down to, like, a lot of the people standing up all over. We got, our sisters up in Kinder Morgan fighting against Kinder Morgan. We got our relatives down in so-called Minnesota. And, what it really comes down to is that who are the last ones that make those decisions when it comes to answering yes or no to the pipeline, to industry. And we need to be more vocal towards up here, it's the chiefs and councils. Down there, it's probably the tribal council or whatever they call tribal men, chairmen. And what it really boils down to is their decisions behind closed doors, and it takes away from what we do as land protectors, water protectors. We need to also be more vocal to them and saying, you know, you got to stop doing these, and be direct, and not to be afraid to say what we need to say, because nowadays, you know, the lateral violence is so deadly on land protectors. They fight amongst each other, which is so sickening. It just oppresses this situation. But yeah, it's so deadly with the treatment, and we have to stay focused on what we need to do, because it's about the unborn. And when we did come back from Standing Rock, we were coming back home, and we came to the Emerson border crossing, and the violence that was shown to us from Canada's side coming home was horrible. They pepper sprayed, they beat a couple of our men, and they pepper sprayed one of our guys, and we were in the line of fire, myself and my 9-year-old son. They didn't care, and they knew we came from Standing Rock. So the aftermath of things that are happening to the people is still continuing, the violence against land protectors. It just needs to be more, we need to get together more and stand with each other, because there's so much division out there. It's ridiculous. And the whole issue is about the unborn. And I'm just having a flashback and thinking of a lot of the people that are, that it's not only for just Standing Rock, that it's the whole territory that was standing up against the pipeline. It wasn't just Standing Rock, but it was also the whole territory of people that were standing up against it.
Joe, appreciate you calling in. Clayton, was there something you wanted to
Yeah,
raise?
I just wanted to respond and recognize Joe Cini, you know, and all of, you know, she mentioned sisters in BC fighting against the Trans Mountain Pipeline right now. Of course, that's the daughter of the late Secwepemc chief, Arthur Manuel, Kanahus Manuel, and her twin sister have been leading that fight. You know, that you can find them online, Teeny House Warriors. They're doing incredible work defending the largest First Nations territory in the interior of BC from the Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion. You know, the good work that Joe Cini and others are doing in support of Makwa Camp and the other camps popping up in so-called Minnesota. You know, these need your funding support. If folks are able to donate to both of those struggles, you know, make sure and do that. And the court case in Standing Rock continues to this day. You know, the Cheyenne River Sioux Nation, the Standing Rock Sioux Nation are still in the courts over the illegality of this approval of the DAPL pipeline. The Army Corps of Engineers did not consult over the violation of fishing rights, over treaty rights, and that court case will be determined on by the fall of 2018. So there's still important ways to support both of those nations in their legal proceedings on the DAPL pipeline. And there's, you know, other fights against Energy Transfer Partners, like in Louisiana. Sherry Foytland is fighting to protect the bayou there in the Gulf Coast from another ETP pipeline. That you can find them on Facebook. Google, you know, Bayou Bridge Pipeline, and find ways to support either through direct funding, social media amplification, or even offering tobacco and, you know, burning a smudge for all of these frontline fights, because they are all connected. We're all talking to each other. We're all sharing resources and, you know, do's and don'ts of what works and what doesn't.
And we're going to talk a bit more about those coming up after the break. We do have to take one more break, but I'm hoping we can maybe leave you before we head to that break with a clip from Chase Iron Eyes from a recent interview where he talked about some of the treatment that he received while on those front lines, and then we'll be back to continue the conversation.
These are actual intelligence officers and others that are very learned in expropriation, subjugation, creating conflict, psychological operations, psychological warfare, public relations campaigns, winning the war of the narrative, creating an enemy, creating a boogeyman. They're calling me an indigenous jihadist. They're calling me a terrorist. Immigrants, foreign immigrants on our soil who call themselves Americans and Canadians have the audacity to call me a jihadist or a terrorist.
Welcome back to In Focus. Before the break, we heard from Josini, who had mentioned she was having some flashbacks from watching the images in the conversation here. And during the break, we were talking as well about the trauma. And Clayton, you wanted to make some comments, about there was a lot of very violent incidents that took place down in Standing Rock, and trauma affected part of that.
Every single person that I've seen come out of Standing Rock, and the people that still live there, the people whose home it is, we're already living with, those of us that are native, with the long-term intergenerational trauma that comes with being children of residential school survivors or survivors of residential school or Indian boarding schools in the U.S. And I think that, to suffer this just what happened, like getting blasted with water, kind of in the spirit of Birmingham, Alabama, like in 2017 on a cold winter night in South Dakota, seeing people, get exploding devices blown up beside them and getting horribly injured. There was a lot of people that got traumatized, re-traumatized again, layers upon layers of it. And so, I think that it's been really important for a lot of our relatives that, continue to fight these extractive industries coming into our communities to make sure and take that time to smudge. I go to therapy every couple of weeks because of this work. You pick up luggage. And, there is a spiritual component to this stuff too. And we have the tools, to be able to heal ourselves, but it's important not to isolate. I was triggered by what my sister Josini said, that she was triggered by this footage, and I think that we always have to be mindful of the self-care, not just individually, but for our communities, that we come together in ceremony and in celebration, and when we talk about things like what happened in Standing Rock, that we do it, with the spiritual foundation and in a good way, because it brings up a lot of things, not just the moment that happened in Standing Rock, but our collective history with 500 years of colonialism and settler colonial state occupation.
Jenni, I think of Treaty Camp Raid Day, and when Dallas said to us all, we've been experiencing this for 500 years, but then right after that there was hours and hours of people being pepper sprayed and hit with rubber bullets and tasered, and the sound cannons and all that followed. In your speaking with people, after all of this has gone down, is there a lot of PTSD from not only this event but from prior trauma, people that were down there?
Absolutely. As I've said before, I think people that had gathered at Standing Rock already had recognized the historical trauma that they brought with them that they didn't realize that they had, right? There was a real healing happening at the very time that this fight to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline from crossing the Missouri River was happening, and then compounded by that was a regurgitated play of this militarized force encroaching on Native people, on Native lands, and on Native rights. And that's not an old story. That's a new story. Or that's not a new story. That's an old story in America that gets played out over and over again. And I would just say that I think that, what Standing Rock represents today for a lot of people, too, was this way to come heal, was a way for some people to arrive and get sober, was a way for people to connect to perhaps a sense of family that perhaps never existed from where their communities are. It was so much bigger than an environmentally led movement, which it started as. And I would just say that I think that given this kind of brand identity, for lack of a better word, this monumental force that Standing Rock represents, I would say that, if I were a tribal leader of this, knowing behind this movement with this kind of brand, I would feel a certain sense of responsibility to harness that and realize that it's not just for Standing Rock in general, but it was for all Indigenous peoples to unite. And I'm grateful to know that the money that was raised for Standing Rock is still being used to press forward on a court battle, a very important court battle. But I think that it also needs to recognize that there needs to be this elongated embrace of all Indigenous peoples. This wasn't just a Standing Rock issue. This was an Indigenous peoples issue. And we certainly saw that with the number of people who came from all over the world.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jenny, I can't tell you how many people I talked to that, they said they came there for healing. Chase, did you want to weigh in on the trauma of everything that's taken place and that beforehand?
Okay. Yeah, well, I appreciate all the comments that have been made. Living on Standing Rock, that's where I grew up, but living there is suspenseful. It's like living in an undeclared water emergency because that pipeline carries 500,000 barrels of oil per day, and just 1% we don't know what their leak detection systems are, but it's clear. I'm working with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe to help address this immediate and urgent emergency that would happen if the pipelines spill. And also, I'm also facing 6 years in prison, along with others who were recognizing their natural rights, their birthrights, and then trying to translate that struggle, the struggle for indigenous liberation, into places and spaces that those who should be recognizing, their birthrights, their constitutional rights, and their civil rights, those who call themselves Americans and Canadians. Standing Rock represents this sort of crossing of these global movements, and I think we need to call for unity in all of this. On the indigenous side of things, up in Canada and what is now the United States, we have the same issues where the tribal governments, the NCAIs, the National Indian Gaming Associations, the AFNs, they're seen as their mission is somehow different than those of the American Indian movement, of Idle No More, those who assert original sovereignty and treaty-based sovereignty. We should all be doing the same thing. We should all be working towards the same thing, be feathers of the same eagle, so to speak. So I just wanted to add that much about, the healing process, the trauma that was executed, corporate-sponsored state executed violence in all of its forms, and really keep the call out to continue to unite. Thank you.
We're starting to run short on time here, but I'm hoping maybe we could go to a quick clip from Joy Braun, who was one of the first few people to make up the Sacred Stone Camp that was part of the No Dapple movement. Hopefully we have that clip of Joy from the Indigenous Environmental Network.
Standing Rock was a singular time and place. It was the spark of that seventh generation prophecy, where we, as the seventh generation, would stand up and rise and invite the world to stand up and rise with us, to start a movement that we can go back to our old ways.
Clayton, as I mentioned, we're down to our last minute or two here, but as Joy and LaDonna said, was Standing Rock that seed, that spark that's now spreading?
Absolutely. In the months to come, we need to have all eyes on the conflict with the Keystone XL pipeline. There are dates that have been set for proposed construction in the spring. There has been a big call out for the Promise to Protect initiative. Google Promise to Protect, to find out how you can get involved, and you will receive information about how to stand in solidarity shoulder to shoulder with people mobilizing on the Keystone XL. And here in Canada, we have the March 10th Protect the Inlet. So calling on all our relatives in British Columbia to join us on March 10th, on this Saturday, where thousands of us are going to march against the Kinder Morgan pipeline and send the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau a huge message that we need to stop KM, and you need to show us the science that you use to determine the approval of that ridiculous carbon bomb known as the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
Jenny, I hate to only give you 30 seconds, but that's about all I can do. What will be your thoughts when you think back on the legacy of Standing Rock 5-10 years from now?
I think it's always going to be with us. I don't think there's ever going to be a looking back. It is with us, here to stay. The fire has spread, and I think that we all who experienced it and understand the power of Standing Rock have a responsibility to keep practicing it in our daily lives for whatever it is that means, because people woke up. They woke up to issues and ideas that often seemed foreign, sovereignty and our Indigenous rights, and it's our job to hold people up to that task and remind them that this happened and that it will continue to happen.
I don't even think you used all your 30 seconds, Jenni, but appreciate that. That is actually all the time we do have for this week, so I want to thank our guests so much, Jenni Monet for joining us here in studio, Clayton Thomas Muller, and Chase Iron Eyes from the road, and to the viewers and those who joined us online, appreciate that as well. On March 30th, APTN Investigates will be debuting a new documentary called After Standing Rock that will explore a number of the things that we spoke about here today. And you can watch this episode online and as a podcast a little later today. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great day. We'll see you back here next week.